Hello, everybody. This is Davide Falessi from the California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo. And today I have the pleasure to introduce the July-August IEEE Software Special Issue on security and privacy on the web. The two guest editors are Tyrone Grandison, who is the CEO of Proficiency Labs. Hi, Tyrone. How are you?
I'm good. Hi, David.
Hi. And the second guest editor is Larry Covert, who is a principal research staff member at the IBM T.J. Watson Research Center in New York. Hi, Larry. How are you?
Very good. Thank you, Dave.
So the first question is for Larry, and it is, what is security and privacy on the web, and why this topic is interesting, when did you start it, and so on?
Well, that's a good question. If you think about it, so much of the world economy is now driven by interaction over the web. Whether you are at home working on your desktop using a web browser, or you're in your office trying to get your work done, or if you're out on the go using a mobile device, whether that be a phone or a tablet, or it may be interacting with Internet of Things kinds of technologies. So much of the interaction that you have is done through the web, over whether it be directly through, let's say, a web browser, or some kind of web protocol that's being used. And this has evolved over the past 20 years since the first release of the NCSA web browser. About 10 years ago, we submitted a proposal to the IEEE Symposium on Security and Privacy, which is arguably one of the premier conferences on security and privacy, proposing to have the first workshop on web security. At the time, we called it Web 2.0 Security and Privacy. Web 2.0 was nominally the successor to the first generation of web technologies, where you had things, you could interact with a server by making a request and getting a response without having to change the web page. And there were a number of other technologies that were being put together on how to do composition of functionality from one or more websites. And the technology has been changing. So at that first workshop, we had things like mashups, various forms of authentication, discussions around sandboxing, and the like. And that has continued to evolve over the following 8 years of the workshop. So just to give you an idea of the kinds of technologies that we've had at the workshop, we've talked about various kinds of authentication, delegation, discussions about the kinds of authentication technologies that are specific to the web protocols, including OpenID and OAuth. And from the very beginning, we've talked about various kinds of sandboxes, whether it be implemented solely in JavaScript, technologies like AdSafe or Caja, whether it be implemented in the browser itself, and that provides the functionality, and then the various isolation mechanisms that are possible for things like plugins. Then you get into a range of discussions around, so that's the core technology. Then you get into the range of technologies or applications that sit on top of that, such as social networks, and various issues around privacy, not just around the social networks, but the browsing or the web technologies that the end user uses, and then what the services on the other end of the wire provide. People have worried about the content that's in the browser cache, including the URL, so that other websites can figure out where you've been visiting. The use of fonts and other technologies, including JavaScript engine itself, to fingerprint the browser, so the websites can track who you are and what you're doing. Discussions around advertising networks, various kinds of flaws in the network technologies, including cross-site scripting, cross-site request forging, and the like. And then in later years of the workshop, we had a transition towards some discussion around mobile, and that mobile discussion has now transitioned into its own workshop on mobile security and technologies. And along the way, we've had a number of interesting keynote speakers from a variety of organizations, including commercial organizations and service providers, as well as the security providers for the Internet. but fascinating set of topics over these past 10 years.
Mm-hmm. So the next question is for Tyron, and it is, why do readers need to be aware about what is going on security and privacy on the web?
So that's an excellent question. And the reason is that security and privacy right now is almost a feature of a part of everything that we're doing in this current age. So if we're interacting on our phones, if we're watching TV, if we're out and about and interacting via Fitbit, I mean, that all involves web software interactions with the web. And underpinning all that software, you have to actually think about the ramifications on, the data that's actually being produced, the ramifications on the systems that underpin the technologies that we're using, and, how that could actually be used to compromise or not compromise our privacy and security. And just to step back a little bit, just so we can actually level set the people that are listening, we're talking about security. We're talking about mechanisms that enable you to protect, your confidentiality, to make sure that your information is intact, and to ensure that only people that should have access to your data or information do have access to it. When we're talking about privacy, you want to make sure that people that you want to have access to certain types or categories of information for certain purposes also have access to that information. The interesting point these days is that web software is embedded in almost every single device, in every single facet of what we're actually doing. So, for example, last year at the Web 2.0 Security and Privacy workshop, we had a bunch of discussions and talks and presentations on the impact, like what happens when you're actually watching TV. There was this one paper on, I Know What You Did Last Sunday, which was discussing the fact that most of the TV stations within, I won't say which one, but within a European country, were behind the scenes monitoring, tracking the users, their usage patterns, and then actually monetizing that information itself. We looked at the effectiveness of how security mechanisms, for example, the images you see when you log on to see what's in your bank account. Like, does that actually give you a measure of security or not? Does that actually add any benefit whatsoever? When you actually go and visit websites and you have to do some sort of a query on a backend system, like what information is actually being sent to the backend system, and what mechanisms are in place to secure it. So, I mean, the reason why it's really important that we have to look at it right now is because everything that we're actually using that's important to us, as a human race, involves web software, and all that information is actually valuable. All those resources have to be protected, and security and privacy is that field that actually addresses how do we actually do it.
Great. So the next question is, where have you been? I mean, what has changed over the last 20 years since the related the Mosaic closure? What fundamentally changed on the web, and how this affects security and privacy?
So that's a very good question, because 20 years in technology is a very long time. And if you think about it, if you go back 20 years, when NCSA first released the web browser, it had limited functionality. It had HTML. There was no idea of a CSS to do style sheets and the like. And the server side was also fairly simple. It started out with mostly static content and evolved towards adding more dynamic features. And there are now many different kinds of programming models on the server side. In that time frame, if we go back 10 years, we were starting to look at how content from multiple sources could be composed. And so you got into web portals and such to bring together content from multiple sources. And there the question was, how do you now protect both the end user but also the websites from one another.
Mm-hmm.
But the basics have always remained the same, which is, who are you protecting, and what kind of privacy are you trying to preserve in that environment? So there's a question of, are you protecting the end user, or are you protecting the service providers whose interests are being served? So that's always been an interesting tension, which also needs the support of the technology, both on the client side as well as in the cloud. And as we move forward, we're going to be seeing increased composition of content, but from a much larger variety of devices. Many of those devices don't have what some people would refer to as a head. It doesn't have a screen necessarily, as Tyrone mentioned. Could be related to the Internet of Things. So it could be your thermostat. It could be your television. You're not using it in the traditional way that you have used the web in the past. And then we're going to be seeing a large number of service providers rather than, let's say, large monolithic applications on the back end.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'll also add that from a software engineering perspective, the landscape has actually changed dramatically. I mean, now doing stuff agilely or using agile development techniques or employing lean is the way of development these days, which means that you have shorter cycles, de-emphasis on testing per se. You have a lot of frameworks that allow you to actually produce and get to a deliverable, get to a software product really quickly. Mm-hmm. The problem is that most of these frameworks and these techniques don't have the notions of, what does it mean to have a secure platform from whoever uses perspective, whether it's a service provider or it's just the user, the consumer. So right now, you have to be very, very acutely aware of what are the controls that your particular framework has. How do you augment it? How do you actually lock it down? How do you not unknowingly endanger an end user or service provider, which is a lot of the news articles you see about these compromises happening are due to people just not being aware of the tools and the mechanisms that they can actually use, or if they're even available. So I mean that's also a change in terms of the software development cycles and tools available.
Great. Okay, so the next and last question is, where are you heading? I mean, what are the next steps in security and privacy on the web?
So this is really a challenging problem because the technology is so rapidly evolving. If you think about mobile devices, most of them are in fact using the web and web technologies under the covers. An example would be going out to make a purchase. You may authenticate yourself on your cell phone using perhaps a biometric technology. That now interacts with the service provider, the financial services on the back end, and goes off to another party to do the fulfillment. And that fulfillment may, in fact, send a number of messages on requests to various service providers, including those that will make delivery or ship something physical to you. It's this composition that becomes very challenging, both from a security and privacy point of view, and the number of technologies. And as Tyrone mentioned, it's from a commercial point of view, from the point of view of the let's say startups or even established companies. How do they now move much more quickly to meet expectations, both in the developed world as well as in the emerging economies, where they have to come up with alternatives that we take for granted in the developed economies.
Mm-hmm. To echo and put a fine point on what Larry just said, the future is in how do you actually enable or do security and privacy, web security and privacy, software development in resource-constrained environments, as in the developing world, where, as Larry just mentioned, you basically don't have the same resources that you'd have in the developed world. But again, the rate of technology adoption is a lot higher there than it is here. The issue of how do you actually deal with stuff that is supposedly magic or invisible? Because most people using devices right now are unaware of the fact that behind it it's a web program that's actually running, and no one is actually giving them guarantees or telling them that something is going to be done with regards to their data or the information that is stored on it. So the issue now becomes like, how can you actually do web software and web software security and privacy in an environment where you're pushing things more towards the back end, more towards the edges, the cloud, if you want to call it that, and also providing guarantees on both sides, guarantees to the service provider and guarantees to the consumer, the user, that are verifiable. So that is where I think this is heading. I also think it's heading in a direction where we have to start educating just software developers generally on what it is to actually develop secure software. That will actually bring us far, far way ahead.
Okay. So I thank you again, Tyrone and Larry, for your availability and your introduction to the July-August AWS Software Special Issue on Security and Privacy on the Web. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.